All right, let's understand how you can do connection pooling. What exactly is connection pooling? Why do you need connection pooling when you're using edge runtimes? Why does a simple Prisma project not work in serverless backends, specifically in Cloudflare workers? Let's get right into it. A few sort of prerequisites or good videos to have already gone through include SQL databases, this track right here, and the Prisma track. Might be good for you to have already gone through these through. And serverless backends, this track we have covered in a live video, but we did not cover the last slide, which is what this video is about. Specifically, how can you create a Cloudflare worker app that runs on the Cloudflare runtime, but connected to a database using Prisma? How do you introduce Prisma to your Cloudflare worker app? Let's get right into it. If you want to do this yourself, there is a blog post right here on Prisma deploying to Cloudflare workers. You can go through this yourself and try to create an application on your own. That's the best way to learn. Or we can go through this together. Let's get right into it. The first thing we need to understand is, why does Prisma not work out of the box? Why is it we have to do something special? We have to do connection pooling for Prisma to work with our application if you're using Cloudflare workers? And the answer resides in this slide. If you remember, I told you even Express doesn't work on Cloudflare workers because Express has a lot of very Node.js specific dependencies. But Cloudflare does not use Node.js. It has its own runtime, which is what we discussed in this 6th slide right here. Okay, they have created their own version of Node.js. They have their own JavaScript runtime. And there are a few libraries that will just not work for them. Prisma is one such library. It will not just work out of the box. You have to make some changes for it to work with the Cloudflare worker app, which is what we're discussing in this video. The reason it does not work with Prisma is, number one, there can be many connections. The reason it does not work with Cloudflare workers is, number one, there can be many connections open to the database since there can be multiple workers open in various regions. Cloudflare has workers in the name. It is a serverless environment, which means it could have 100 different locations where your backend is running, which means all of those locations have a connection to your database. And Postgres, or generally databases, have a limit to the max number of open connections they can have. So if you're using a serverless architecture, you probably don't want to create something like this. If you have 100 workers running, all of them will try to connect to the database. At some point, your database will be like, I am not accepting any more connections. My maximum connection limit has been reached. That's the first problem. Hence the word connection pooling. I kept saying connection pooling is the solution for this. What does that mean? It basically means, if you have a worker 1 and a worker 2 and a worker 3, and if this is your final Postgres database, let's say, rather than these guys directly connecting to the database, they can connect to a connection pool. They can first connect to something else, which allows many connections, not just one. And this connection pool maintains a single connection, let's say, or 3 connections to the final server. This way, even if the final database allows only 2 connections, your connection pool actually has just a single connection to this guy. The workers all have multiple connections to the pool, which is why this architecture makes a lot of sense for serverless applications. If you have a serverless application, if you don't know upfront how many workers you will have, and if this could grow to 100 workers, your worker shouldn't directly connect to your database. Your worker should connect to a pool or another service which maintains connections to the database, and it should forward all the Postgres queries it wants here to the pool that can maintain your connections. That way you don't have hundreds of open connections to the database. That is the first reason why you might want to use a connection pool. And the second reason is that the Prisma library has dependencies that are Cloudflare runtime does not understand. There are, just like Express, even Prisma wasn't originally made, was originally made just for Node.js. It was not made for, random libraries like this one, like Hono or, 100 different runtimes. It was made for just Node.js. Eventually, Dino came into the picture. Cloudflare workers brought their own runtime. And so these guys realized, there are some libraries that are heavily reliant on Node.js. There are some libraries that you can pull out and they will work with any runtime. So if this is your project, and let's say it has a node modules folder which has, you know, Prisma as a folder. Prisma will have multiple folders inside. There will be one engine folder. There will be, if you remember, one client folder. There might be a core folder, so on and so forth. And there are some dependencies here that only work with Node.js. And then there are other dependencies here that work with, you know, all runtimes. So engine is one such dependency of Prisma that is very Node.js specific. So what these guys say in this blog post, or generally, कि भाई, if you want to use this with the Cloudflare runtime, if you want to deploy your application over to Cloudflare workers, don't include this dependency, and also maintain a connection pool, have a different Postgres URL, a connection pool URL that your Cloudflare workers connect to. Don't directly connect to the database. If this is your database, connect to the database through a connection pool. So these are the two things that Cloudflare expects you to do. Sorry, not Cloudflare. Prisma expects you to do if you want to deploy a Prisma application on Cloudflare workers. Let's see this more in action. You can read all of this if you want here on this blog post. That's where I learned about it as well. All right, cool. If you want, you actually should read through this edge section right here. It says if your application is deployed via an edge server or edge function offering, or is deployed from a serverless offering and has non-standard runtimes, which means it does not use Node.js, it uses something else. It is a edge deployed app, and common applications include Cloudflare workers, deploy, Vercel edge functions, so on and so forth. If your application does use an edge function, then they have standard guidelines on how you can deploy to Deno deploy, how can you deploy to Cloudflare workers. This is the one that we are following today. What does it say? Number one, set up your application. Fairly straightforward. Create a simple Cloudflare worker application. So we've done this a few times. We did this in the live class. So I'm hoping this isn't too difficult. I'm still going to try to follow it very slowly and, step by step create an application. So I'm going to open my terminal on the right, going to open this blog post on the left, and we'll try to go through it one by one. First things it says is, let me I create an empty folder called week-12-6, maybe 7, and then go into this folder and then run npm create Cloudflare at the latest, which will do what? It will initialize an empty worker application for me. It asks, what is the directory do you want to create your application in? Doesn't really matter. I think I'm going to call it app. And what do I want as the basic starter? A simple hello world worker is fine. Do you want to use TypeScript? Yes. And then let it create a basic application and bring all the dependencies for me. Do you want to deploy your application? Maybe no for now. I will eventually deploy it. Open this in Visual Studio Code. Now that I have it open, you will see a very basic application. Let me clean things up. And then we have a very basic Cloudflare worker app. You can add Hono to it if you want. What is Hono, Harkirat? The thing that we discussed here in this slide. Or you can have a empty, simple, very native application. Does not work either. Does not matter either way, because we're just trying to test its connection with Prisma. Not really worried about the application logic too much. Next up, it asks you to install Prisma as a dev dependency. So let's do that next. Let's open the terminal and run npm install -- save dev Prisma. Next up, it asks you to initialize Prisma. You can do npx prisma init, or you can create a file like this in prisma/schema folder. Oh, well, it does ask you to do npx prisma init, so that works. Let's run npx prisma init, and you will see it creates a new folder called Prisma, inside which schema.prisma file exists. Let me remove all the comments. Let's stick to Postgres over here, and the URL. All right, I took a pause here. The reason is that the URL here is super important. As I mentioned, if this is our final Cloudflare app, the Cloudflare worker that we will be deploying today, it will not be directly connecting to our database. If this is my database, we won't make a direct connection. We will actually go to what's called a connection pool. We will first create a connection pool, and then our worker will connect to the connection pool, which is what will connect to the final database. It will maintain a single persistent connection, and all the workers that we will have today, 1, 2, 3, does not matter how many, all of them will connect to the connection pool, which will have a single or 3 connections to the database to avoid too many direct connections to our database. So the URL that I'm putting here, at least right now, is my either avian URL, or you can go to neon.tech, does not matter. You can get any simple free Postgres database for now. Eventually we will see how you can route the requests through the connection pool. So for now, I'm going to copy mine from avian. You can get one on avian.io, or you can get one on neon.tech, does not matter, and paste that specific URL here. This is not the right way to, you shouldn't be pasting it directly in schema.prisma. You should be pasting it in a .env file. But for now, since we're just migrating the table, this is fine. Next up, what does it say? It asks you to create a very simple schema for your application. The application that they are creating is an application where you can go and see all the logs from a server. Fairly simple, nothing too complicated. We'll create something similar, but you don't have to. You can create a simpler application if you want. Eventually, when we see the application logic for this, you'll see it's nothing too complicated. So you can, nothing, not a lot is happening at the application level. What do I mean by application level? I mean in this index.ts file. They also have an enum here. Feel free to replace this with a string to keep things simple. For now, the goal is to understand how can you connect to a database via connection pools, and not know how complicated the application logic is. Next up, we migrate our database. We create our migrations. We tell our final database that bhai, these are the tables that you have to create. Specifically, a log table is what we're creating right now. All right, that took a long time, but now my database is migrated. What's the next step? Usually the next step is you start to write your code and connect to your database, create the Prisma client, so on and so forth. But what do they say? They say first, enable accelerate in the Prisma data platform. Here is where they tell you, okay, bhai, if you want to deploy this application on Cloudflare workers, it is not as easy as just creating the client and going. You have to first create this connection pool thingy. You have to change this URL to the connection pool URL. You have to do all of that things. And Prisma Accelerate is what lets you do that. Prisma ORM currently does not work with Cloudflare workers. However, you can use the Prisma ORM on Cloudflare workers through Prisma Accelerate. What is Prisma Accelerate, Harkirat? This is their, paid offering. This is how they make money. What does it say? Global database cache available in over 280 locations with built-in connection pooling. What do we want? We want connection pooling. Does it give you other things? Yes. But what do we want? We want this right here. We want for them to create a connection pool to our database so that our workers can use this connection pool URL. So if I go here, click on get started, sign up, sign in, you will come to this screen, and here it says new project. This creation of a new project is, creation of this new connection pool. So I would urge you to create a fresh project here, call it whatever you want. And here, enable accelerate. You can also read all of them here in the blog post that we were following. What does it say? Sign up, create a project, navigate to the project, enable accelerate. Enable accelerate. And here it asks you for your real database connection string. So this string right here. and then the region where you want, your connection pool to be created, and select a region where a database for near to your database. Ideally, you want this connection pool to be very close to your database. So you should probably select the same region as the region your database is deployed in. Enable accelerate. And let's go back here. What does it say next? Generate and accelerate connection string and copy it to your clipboard. Generate new API key. There you go. It gives me a connection string. This is my final connection string. This is a link to my connection pool, which is what I will use in my worker. My worker will no longer connect directly to my database. My worker will connect to this mini machine that they have created, this, connection pool that they have created. So this is the URL that I want here. This URL bit is super important. First of all, you should never be pasting your URLs directly over here. You should have them in env files right here. But the way Wrangler does environment variables is not exactly by pasting things in this env file, but in this wrangler.toml file. So effectively, what am I saying? Okay, if you want to, let me full screenify this. Full screenify. I just invented a new word. If you look at schema.prisma, it's wanting to pick database URL from an environment variable. And when you're using Cloudflare workers, a way to inject environment variables in your app is by using this wrangler.toml file. So this wrangler.toml files, if you look through all the comments over here, you'll probably see environment variables. There you go. So this is how you can introduce environment variables in a Cloudflare app. And what is our environment variable? Our environment variable is database underscore URL, which is the same string that we have right here, making sure. And what do we want it pasted here? What do we want the application to connect to? We want the application to connect to my Prisma Accelerate URL. So this is what I will paste in my wrangler.toml. Okay, and this is my final URL that gets injected in index.ts, where I will write all of my logic. Cool. These guys also suggest you something extra. Okay, when you want to run CLI commands, if you want to run a migrate command, in that case you probably don't want to connect to the connection pool. You probably want to connect directly to your application. So what they suggest is have your .env file, and in your .env file have the direct URL to point to, well, as the name suggests, your direct AVN URL, which is this URL right here. And in your schema.prisma, don't just have URL, also have direct URL equal to env of direct URL. This you don't need. If you read through it, they say the direct URL field is not required for Prisma Accelerate. It allows you to introspect and perform schema migrations. If you read through Prisma's documentation, you will see this direct URL field is what? It is the connection URL for direct connections to the database. If you use a connection pooler, which we are, Prisma CLI commands that require connection to the database will use the direct URL argument. What do you want? You want when I'm running this command, then where does it connect? You want when I'm running this command, it connects to the direct URL. And that's what the CLI sort of dictates. Okay, if you're running CLI commands, it will try to connect to your direct URL, which in our case is what? It is this thing right here. Harkirat, why have you defined it here? Why did you not define it in wrangler.toml? You said all the environment variables will be here. All the environment variables that you want to use in index.ts will be here. All the environment variables that you want to use from the CLI will be in .env. Only the environment variables that you need during index.ts is run, which basically means, whenever you're using the Prisma client here, they will reside in wrangler.toml, which is this connection pool URL. But whatever you need in the CLI can just be in the top level.env. Cool. This part might be mildly complicated. You don't need this direct URL thingy, by the way. It is only needed if you want, your CLI to directly connect to the database. When you're doing migrations, you can also, just replace the URL here with your direct URL whenever you're performing a migration and then revert. So it doesn't necessarily have to go down the direct URL route. either way, since this is the thing that they're recommending, we are doing the same thing. Quick recap of what have we done. Number one, we did the standard things to create a Prisma schema. Number two, we went to Prisma Accelerate and created our connection pool URL. Number three, we put this connection pool URL in wrangler.toml so that our final code, our final index.ts uses this connection pool URL and not our direct AVN URL. It does not use this. It does use this. Cool. Let's see what they say next. Next up, they say add this database URL. We have done that. And they say install the extension accelerate dependency. So if you want to use connection pools, or more specifically, if you want to use the Prisma Accelerate platform, you have to bring the @prisma/extension accelerate dependency. And that's it. Then you just generate your client. But when you are generating the client, an important flag they mention, they say, what was the client? First of all, what happened when I used to run npx prisma generate? It would generate the final files from which I can do prisma client.user.find and so on and so forth. It would generate all of these clients. They say if you want to run your application in a serverless environment, if you want to run your application on Cloudflare workers, then you need to generate it with the no engine flag. What does the no engine flag mean here, Hakirat? Let's read through it. They say the generated client has a smaller bundle size and is optimized for edge environments like Cloudflare workers. The smaller bundle size is due to the fact that the interfaces that talk to the database are no longer bundled with the Prisma client as the logic and are now handled by Prisma Accelerate. They basically say, okay, if you run npx prisma generate normally, then we put a lot of things in node modules /@prisma /client/engine. We add a lot of things. The final bundle size becomes very big. But if you generate with the -- no engine flag, then we do not generate a bunch of these things. A lot of these things we skip, specifically the things that you don't need in the cloud environment. That is what no engine flag over here means. If you read through their other documentation for how this works in a serverless backend like AWS Lambda, you will see this a little bit more. That's where I read about it as well. Okay, what does this no engine flag mean and how it decreases the size of the bundle, how they limit what all they're putting in Prisma, so that they limit the things that you put on Cloudflare workers. The number of things that reach Cloudflare workers directly are smaller because you don't need a lot of these things. A lot of these things exist where they exist in this connection pool sort of wherever the connection pool is present. So when you usually deploy your Cloudflare applications, you have, let's say, 10 MB of code here in the Prisma folder that goes to your AWS machine. But if you use the no engine flag here, then you maybe have like 5 MB of code that reaches your Cloudflare workers, and the rest of the 5 MB exist where? They exist in your connection pool. Wherever the connection pool is, this has the rest 5 MB code already present there, so you don't need it bundled over here in the local client, or bundled here where you're whatever the code that you're pushing on Cloudflare workers. You don't need that 10 MB code there anymore. 5 MB already exists here. 5 MB you now push to Cloudflare workers. And how will you tell Cloudflare, or how will you tell Prisma to only generate this 5 MB of bundle and not the whole thing? By using the no engine flag. Hopefully that's clear. And that's it. Now when you're generating, so this would generate the client. So now I can just import the client here and start to connect to our database. So let's look at the code and let's see what they say. Let's copy over this code and paste it here. Let's try to explore the code. Number one, they say that the environment variable has a database URL. That is true. If I go to wrangler.toml, you will see I added the database URL here. This is only needed for TypeScript. If this was a JavaScript application, this thing wouldn't even be present. It is only that we are using a TypeScript application and we want this env variable to have a type, which is why we introduce this interface at the top. And what does the logic say? The logic says, okay, I'm going to initialize a Prisma client. dot dollar extends with accelerate. This part is important. The at Prisma slash extension accelerate npm module that we had added, you have to tell the Prisma client that I'm using the Prisma client with accelerate, and then you just create a log. This is nothing. This is just, putting things in the database. You can think of this as, a sign up route where you're putting something in the user database. Similarly, anytime someone visits your application, you create a new log. You put something in the database कि हाँ भाई, a new log was created. Someone visited our application with the request method and the request URL. कि someone visited this specific thing. You can put whatever text you want here. Doesn't have to be this complicated. The point is you're starting to populate your database here. Anytime a user sends you a request, does not matter if it's a GET request or a POST request, you populate the database, and then you check what all entries exist in the same database, and then you log them as well as return them to the user. You don't return that to the user, you return to the user the method that they had sent. So this is how you're populating the database, number one. And then you're also logging the current set of, first 20 logs that exist on the database, so you can see that the database is actually being populated. Cool. That's what the application does. If this is too complicated, we can also make it, slightly leaner. Let's just log the response here. Let's keep it even simpler. Let's say the application simply puts some data in the database and then logs it on in the console. Does not worry about, actually getting any data from the database, returning it to the user. Very simple application. Just puts something in the database. The thing to check is it actually able to put things in the database? Does it, actually, is it able to connect to the database through the connection pool? That's the thing that we need to check. And how will we confirm that? We can just look at the logs and make sure this response that we are logging says that one row has been added, or we can, just explore the database in other ways. Doesn't matter. All right, let's save this and then let's deploy this. What's the way to deploy? First, you have to log in. So npx wrangler login. I am already logged in my Cloudflare account. How will you confirm that you're logged in? You can run npx wrangler who am I. This will tell you your Cloudflare account details, and so it tells me this is my email, and this is the access that this CLI has on my Cloudflare account. It has workers write access, which is why when I run npm run deploy, which basically runs wrangler deploy, it is able to deploy my worker, and I can start to use it. It gave me a warning though. Unexpected fields found in top level fields database URL. Oh, I have to add a, makes sense. Whenever you're creating an environment variable, you have to add this bracket vars closing bracket above it. So let me do that one more time. Vars database URL, and now you're good to go. Let me redeploy the application. And now let me hit this worker that I have created. And I see request method get, which tells me I think we're good to go. If there was an error in this creation, this would have failed, an exception would have been thrown. Since an exception isn't being thrown, I think we're good to go. We can also, return response.json and return back the response that we get here so that the user sees it. I think you have to remove new when you're doing that. npm run deploy. This will just help us confirm that, we're actually able to put data inside by returning the database response to the front end. Let's refresh. Here it says ID5 level info. ID5 basically tells me we're able to put data inside the database. ID7, 9, it's incrementing by 2. I wonder why. Can you figure out why? I'm sure there's a reason. But yeah, there you go. We have our application which is able to put data in a database. If I actually explore the database, I'll be able to see entries there. Let me share a few extra things here. You can actually log into cloudflare.com. Let me do that really quickly. And you can look at your workers. Specifically, the one that we just deployed is this app worker. And you can look at the logs. You can update the environment variables directly. So if you don't want to, store this database URL in this wrangler.toml file, you can also just come here and edit variables and replace it. What else? If you look at the logs, I can begin the log stream. If I now refresh this, I will see it says okay. You will see it says okay get. There was a get request to app.100xdevs.com slash whatever the worker. That's pretty much it. We have a worker that is running that is able to connect to a database through a pooled connection. So we have a Cloudflare worker that is running that is connecting to my DB through a pooled connection. How do I know that it's connecting through a pooled connection? The reason is, if you look at the database URL that was present here, if I go back to the logs, or sorry, the environment variables, you will see this URL is not my Avian URL. It is an accelerate prisma data.net URL, which tells me that this specific thing has been routed through a connection pool and we're not directly connecting to the database. Cool. That was all for this one. I would urge you to, go through this whole, in the end, everything is present here. So I would urge you to go through the URL over here. Let me also shorten this a little bit so you can directly hit this URL. There you go. This is a short URL for this specific blog post. If you want to go to it, go to this URL and try to do the whole thing top to bottom yourself. You just have to copy a bunch of code, maybe try to write your own models and create a slightly better application. Try to create it in Hono. Eventually, we'll be creating a project which will use Cloudflare workers as the backend, Prisma as the database, and we'll use Accelerate again. So would urge you to, have all of these steps done once so it's easy for you to do it in the next class. Cool. I'm going to clean up all my resources, by which I mean I'm going to go to AVN and delete this, or at least, change my password. Reset password. I should also hide this. I'm going to do this after the class, but you get the idea. You won't be able to, go to my connection pool and exploit any of my resources. Cool. With that, let's end it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.